these are some of my responses to the $10,000 challenge that Wasset put out there. Now, let me be clear. These are not Waset's responses. These are some of my own personal responses. So I am not speaking for him. So let me just put that out there right off the rip. But some of the responses I found interesting. My guy here, he says that because there is no such thing as African spirituality, but each tribe has its own spiritualities. So this is in the part where Waset was saying that the Bible comes from African spirituality, that everything within the Bible comes from African spirituality that is borrowed and stolen. The fact here you're saying that it's African spirituality, it's not just Kemet. Africa is not just one country, let me put it that way. Africa is not just one country. Yes, there are multiple spiritualities throughout the continent of Africa, depending upon the different tribes, depending upon your different nations. So you have a lot of different spiritualities that come out of Africa. If he was only saying out of Egypt, then that would be one thing. But he said African spirituality. So African spirituality would include the Axiom Empire. Well, let me just give you today's name. That would include Ethiopia, Sudan, all across North Africa, Tunisia, Libya. It would include those areas. This is why when I talk about the Bible itself, I mainly focus and say Mediterranean history, and not just Levantian history or North African history or European history, because it really centers around the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, off into the Arabian Sea and into that area. Those are the general areas of connection that they had for the overwhelming majority of the time that they were there. But what we can see from not only archaeology is that the African and the specific portions that we call Africa today, the Sumerians, the Turkish area, that those were some of the first areas that began to generate population after the Younger Dryas period. But what we can see is that prior to the Younger Dryas period, down in sub-Saharan Africa was the embodiment of the first civilizations that were before the last ice age, which was over 35,000 years ago. But well beyond that time, we see migration patterns. And Chinese DNA scientists has discovered that the Chinese people, the Asian people, come from Africa, that they migrated from East Africa, which would be your Egypt, Ethiopia, Somalia, that entire region, Sudan, that they migrated out of East Africa and became the Chinese people. And they have DNA showing that they had shared contact with the people of the Americas from the Chinese, as well as throughout the South Pacific, Australia, Australia, New Zealand, that entire region. And you have to understand how, just as cultures change once migration happens, so does religion. John gave a great example. If a person moved from inland to the sea, coastal, and while they're coastal, they will begin to change the belief that they brought with them and make it more ocean related. Whereas in Ifa, you may have Mama Wata, which would represent a river goddess or a lake goddess. Once a people move towards the ocean, then they start to develop Poseidon or any other oceanic god. So just as the culture changes as they migrate from one environment to the next environment, so too does the people. So too does the religion. If you're in the plains of Africa, you wouldn't have a god for a mountain god. But then once you start to migrate into the Levant and you start seeing hills and mountains, and you see how storms come over mountains, because we just learned this lesson on our cross-country road trip. We didn't get rained on coming over the mountains in San Diego on the Yuma side, on the desert side, because the mountains block the clouds. The mountain and the wind and the mountains itself block the clouds, so it rained just on the top and the San Diego side of the mountain. So therefore, you will see these storms having something to do with the mountains, not understanding mountains and currents and wind flow and that sort of thing, and you develop a mountain god. But if you did not exist in an area that had mountains, you would never create a mountain god. And so then you begin to create your Yahwehs and your other Canaanite deities and Sumerian deities that deal with the wind and the storm gods of El, of Enlil, and because those were storm gods, storm deities. And so you create mountain gods because you have mountains. If you don't have mountains, then you don't. Now, in the someone also mentioned the Aztecs and the Mayans. We've already talked about how migration happens and where that right now the best theory is the out of Africa theory. The most provable theory is the out of Africa theory. Adam's calendar is the oldest known civilization, somewhat civilization, which is in sub-Saharan Africa. They tried for a long time to say it wasn't a human civilization, but nope, it's a human civilization. And that's older than anything else. So until you find something that's older than about 75 to 2,000 years, 200,000 years old, out of Africa is, and they took their spirituality and it spread just as the culture spread and everything else spread. But of course, everything adapted to its own environment. But even after that, after the Younger Dryas, it speaks, the Kemetic story speaks of how Ra got on a boat. It also talks about how it depends upon which area of Kemet you go to. There's one version that says that Ra got on a boat. There's another version that says that Asar got on a boat and they sailed west and they went all over the world, restarting civilizations all over the world. So you also have that. Took way longer on that than I want to. Number two, the Confessions of Mayat really comes down to understanding calendars. So the main one that people were saying, was about the Sabbath, that the Kemetic did not have a Sabbath. That's actually not true. If you look at the Kemetic calendar, when the Kemetic calendar was based on 360 days, 3 weeks, and it had 3 weeks of 9 days, and the 9th day was a day of rest for the Kemetic people. This was so that you kept the religious festivals and you would rest on the 9th day. So it's not the 7th day Sabbath, but it was a 9th day Sabbath because they had a 360-day calendar, and then they had 5 intercalary days. Now, when the Israelites started becoming part of the Assyrian Empire, and then later on the Babylonian Empire, the Syrians and the Babylonians also had a Sabbatu or Rapatu, depending upon which culture you're looking at. And they had a 7th day of rest based on the god Saturn or Marduk with the Babylonians. And they had this. And you can look at the Assyrian library of Ashurbanipal, and you will see that they had the 1st, the 7th, the 14th, the 28th. They had sometimes the 19th, but the ones that were divisible by 7 were days of rest. Now, they call them the evil days. And some scholars have debated because they call them the evil days. And they say that doctors shouldn't work and the king won't eat, won't work, because they believe that if you did things on this day, God will punish you, or you will be punished by the gods. The evil gods have an opportunity to come and do something to you because you are not giving to the religious rites. And the Confessions of Mayat talks about the fact that if you don't recognize what belongs to God, what is God, and the rituals and rites of God, then you are breaking the codes of not having idols and things of that nature. And in its confessions, it does tell you, it doesn't say directly about honoring your parents, but it talks about being obedient and to your family and taking care of your family. You can't take care of your family and dishonor your parents. That actually makes no sense. So you're simply don't want to use any logic in this one, in that statement. Now I'm going to make a part 2 of this one because I do want to finish his, and there's another person that has something similar. So this is just part 1. If you're watching this, go watch part 2 after this one.